Lovely here, isn't it, my dear? Rain beating on the granite, the smell of the fresh dug earth, and the withered flowers. Uncanny, but I have a feeling you and I were meant to share all this. Here, take my hand. Come with me, come with me. Come with me to Transylvania. You'll like it there. You'll look grand in Transylvania. Cobwebs in your hair. We'll hear the wolves at eventide.
Okay, first we just want to thank everybody for coming here to honor our friend John Zacherley. I certainly understand that this is sad for all of us, and we will all be sad for losing such a great man. But I certainly think that it's also the time to celebrate a remarkable life of a remarkable man who was a friend to all of us. Could go on forever and ever telling stories about John because we all love him. I'm just going to tell one quick story, and then I'm going to turn it over to our speakers. And that is the numerous, and I mean numerous trips over maybe almost 50 years that we took to Bear Mountain up the Palisades. For many years, it was John driving that famous yellow Volkswagen convertible of his, and me sitting in the passenger seat, listening to Pink Floyd, doing things that I really can't talk about. And then for the last maybe 10 or 15 years, when he couldn't drive, I was lucky enough to be unemployed. So basically every week, I would pick him up in New York and drive him up to Bear Mountain. We just had great times. He was well, he was a wonderful man. I honestly can say I think he was the nicest and kindest man I ever met. My son is here visiting, which is great, and I think he remembers him when he was a little baby, and some of the things he did with John were just really, really funny. I won't go into them now because it'll take too long. I'll let other people talk. The last thing I do want to say about John that I learned about these trips up to Bear Mountain, and the thing that I loved the most about him and inspired me the most was his always sense of wonderment and joy. John could find joy and wonderment in the smallest things, in the leaves falling, passing a car on the Palisades, driving up the mountain of Bear Mountain, sitting by the lake at Greenwood Lake and having lunch. Those are just things that he just got joy out of. And I think we all remember for that. So we're going to have a few speakers today who are friends. I have to look and see the order here. David Chitticle will speak first. Then we'll have Gene Dunn will speak. Steve Olson, who owns the West Bank Cafe, who's been a friend to all of us for a long time, was supposed to be here. But they unfortunately had an emergency fire in the restaurant, and he can't be here, which is too bad because I was looking forward to eating lunch there. And then his niece Diane is going to speak, and Perry Chasen will give a reading at the end. We don't have time, to be very honest with you, for everybody to speak and say what they want to say, because I know we all have things to say, but we certainly suggest and recommend, if you want to hang out afterwards and speak among ourselves and tell stories and whatever about John, okay? So I now turn it over to David.
Thank you, but tell him about the snow.
The what?
The snow with the open convertible.
I can't tell that story.
Oh. Hi, how are you? As Jeff said, this is a time to celebrate. I've known John since, I think, 1967. So many memories, so many stories, and last night I was with my grandchildren talking more about him, trying to make them aware. They, of course, had met him over the years. But we're talking, and then we looked out and saw that moon yesterday, that super moon, and the apogee is today. And it seems so appropriate, I think, that the biggest, brightest, best full moon since 1948 is today when we're celebrating John's life. I mean, it's just so symbolic. And I just want to follow up with just a few little things. I mean, there's so many stories about the VW convertible. But one of them is he would just keep the top down no matter what. Snow would be coming down. And he'd be so oblivious, just so happy to have the wind in his face and hair. maybe want to do this in somewhat of a chronological way. I had the pleasure of meeting him, and he was at NEWFM. I know many of us know him first from Chiller Theater and Shock Theater. And do you remember at NEWFM when he was in the studio, he'd open the window and throw down money and report on the people chasing the money he threw down? I mean, this is just how John is. And then I was lucky enough to introduce John to Jeff and to Larry and Tina. And the thing, what we all talked about, is his wonderment and enjoyment of life. And when people would come up to him, whether he was driving and they'd honk, or he'd be at a concert, he would just, never any airs, just always, and he enjoyed it genuinely so much, interacting with everyone. He just did it, and they in turn enjoyed it and loved it and shared it. This truly innocence and childlike wonder, I believe you used that term. And that's really John, and always kindness. And fade over the years, I happened to be with him when Reagan was shot and other strange events, and he would always just try to mellow out and be calm. And I happened to be lucky enough to know him and be a confidant when he met Perry, and that changed his life for the better. And all the wonderful times and adventures they had, and Perry will be speaking about it, and how that made such a positive difference in his, believe it or not, a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, and he was not a Trump voter either. But his neighbors, Jean and Roger, and Jean is here with us today, made such an incredible positive difference in the quality of his life. And those of you who don't know about that must thank Jean, because I cannot tell you the quality difference he's made. And to his many other friends who came today, Larry, his wife Tina, Arnie, his beautiful wife Marianne, and there are other friends who've come. Please just hug yourselves later, be kind to yourselves, and we're all blessed by this wonderful memory. Jeff, who's speaking next?
Okay, well,
Steve was supposed to
I have
speak?
to tell one
Oh,
story.
sure. All right.
Before Gene comes up, this just occurred to me, and I do this only because my son is here. Just to give you an idea of how unassuming Zach was. So this had to be, how old are you?
45.
Because this had to be almost 37, 38 years ago. John was with us when we went to Forbidden Planet so my son could buy some comic books. We're walking around the store, and this kid who's a clerk walks up to John and goes, "Are you Zacherley?" And then, I won't imitate his voice, but in his voice he goes, "Yes, I am. Yes, I am." The kid says, "Could you wait a minute?" He walks in the back, and he brings out one of those paperback books that had Zach's name on, you know, short stories, and he asks him to sign it. Now, you got to remember, my son had known Zach since he was born, and just as this really cool older guy. We're walking out, and I feel a tug on my jacket. My son goes, "Dad, is Zach a star?" You know? And he is a star and was a star. And just one last thing with what David said, he was the most unassuming. I was in the music business most of my life. And I will tell you that I met a lot of stars and celebrities. Zach was the most unassuming celebrity star I ever knew in my life. And I just wanted to, the story just popped into my head. It was probably the only one I could actually tell. So now I'd like to have Gene come up and say a few words, and also just to reiterate what David had said. Gene has taken such, he was his next door neighbor, has taken such incredible care of John over the years. I know we all thanked him once, you know, and you can thank him again privately, but I just wanted to let you know that all of John's friends and family owe you a great debt. And having said that, I don't want to embarrass you, but I'd like you to come and say a few words now.
wipe the tears away, sorry. I moved into the apartment next door to John about 35 years ago, solidifying my relationship with my partner and then future husband, Roger. A few weeks after we moved in, we invited John over to celebrate his birthday. After dinner, Roger went into the kitchen to put frosting on the birthday cake that he had made that afternoon. Suddenly, we heard him scream, "Oh, shit!" Oh, pardon me. No, no. Followed by a loud bang from the kitchen. Well, John and I rushed to the kitchen door, and here's Roger trying to put the cake back up on the counter, and he put his fist down into it. Well, he and the yellow walls of our kitchen were covered with chocolate frosting. John leaned over to me and whispered, "You know, you can still move out." Well, I didn't move out. Fortunately, I stayed and began a 33-year marriage with Roger and a 35-year friendship with John. Being from California, I had never heard of this man called Zacherley, but our friendship grew over time, and I got to know the man who developed a cult following by pulling body parts out of a coffin on live TV. Well, I didn't get it. But it became obvious to me that he was a living legend. Walking down the street with him was a lesson in the breadth of his talents and the breadth of his fan base. In a legendary moment of recognition, this short man walked up to him as he was walking down Central Park West and looked up and said to John, "You're John Zacherley." And John looked down and said, "And you're Paul Simon." Well, I still didn't get it. That character was not the man that I knew. I knew John as the gentle, humble, loving, and kind man next door. We should all be so lucky to have a neighbor like John. John was forever sharing things with us, stories of his visits with his family in Philadelphia, the oddest toys we figure must have been given to him by fans, and the occasional item that he would pull out of his closet that he had no idea. It's been in there for years. One day he came over with an American flag with 38 stars. It was made when Nebraska became a state, and probably made sometime between 1877 and 1890. He said, "Here, take it." No, John. So we put it on eBay, and John made $1,000 from the transaction. He was in such awe that such a transaction could be made on a computer in your home. He was even more technically challenged than I. He was amazed, if not challenged, by technology and the way social media developed. Cell phones, FaceTime on cell phones, it was beyond him. John delighted in showing us his world of nature, outside the confines of New York. He would knock on the door and say, "Hey, do you want to take a ride?" Well, we knew where he'd be going. And so our response was, "You bet." And off we'd go in his famous Volkswagen up to 7 Lakes at Bear Mountain. This was John's nirvana. We'd get a little bit stoned, pardon me. Who put that in there? And drive around the lake communing with nature and then have lunch at one of his favorite restaurants in the area. And he'd even share his magic sunglasses with us to our maximum enjoyment. When he could no longer drive, and when he lost his car, National Geographic's magazine and nature shows on TV became his escape from the city. Roger and I were fortunate enough to be able to do a considerable amount of traveling to all 7 continents. And John just loved to hear about our vacations and would always ask where we were going next. "John, we just got back." And we would always bring John a traditional gift from every trip we took. Now, what do you give somebody with a quirky sense of humor and a love of nature? Rocks. He loved it. He has a black pebble from a lava sand beach in Santorini, a white pebble from a rock garden in Kyoto, a rock from a vista point overlooking Machu Picchu in Peru, and a stone from the base of the Great Pyramid in Egypt. Of course, John and Roger were a bit disappointed when I told them that the Egyptian Tourist Board probably dropped rocks at the base of the pyramid so that tourists think they could go home with an artifact. You all know John's biography, so I won't elaborate. But he delighted in telling us tales of his military service in Italy and North Africa, and of the various jobs he had in the realm of broadcasting. He'd tell us many tales of many of you who are here today, and who meant so much to him. He'd recount some of the stories again and again, until his memory began to fade. And as dementia took its grasp upon him, he couldn't recall what he was wanting to say, he would tap his forehead, smile, and wink, and then fall back into silence. 2 years ago, John had what we call an episode, an issue which made him realize that living his life the way he wanted was coming to an end. He missed his freedom and cherished his life, and loved and accepted new people that then came into his life. And it was his 5 aides, the women whom I call John's angels, who helped him live his precious life to its fullness the last years of his life. Mila isn't here today, but please do say hello and personally thank Sharon, Patsy, Sparkle, and Holly. They were his angels to the end. The day John died, some of our neighbors placed flowers outside his door. And by the time I got home the following evening, another neighbor had placed this angelic piece of porcelain outside his door. To me, it is an angel. And as angelic as she is, she's carrying a pumpkin, symbolic of John's happiest day. I let her sit outside the door for 4 days, and then took her in before she disappeared. With a smile and a wink, I think John would approve of my keeping her. So, to you, the neighbor who may have placed her there, thank you. And thank you, John, whatever you are.
Thank you very much, Gene, and thank you for recognizing those lovely ladies there who took such good care of John. So if Steve Olson had been here, unfortunately, like I said, it was an accident at the restaurant, he would regale us with great stories of wonderful nights with he and Louis Black sitting around drinking wine, and John would have his Manhattan, by the way, and just telling stories. So Steve, apologize for not being here. Having said that, Diane Hansen's going to come up, one of Zach's nieces.
Tell them about the kitchen. They should know about John's kitchen.
Okay, for those of you who never saw John's apartment, which I'm sure many of you have, in his kitchen he had, and then I'll tell you why he did it in a second, which really tells you all about him. He had a little platform, and this is a New York studio apartment, mind you. He had a little platform bed with a little 19-inch television at the foot of it. And the reason he did it was when he was on late night as a disc jockey, he didn't want to come home and disturb his neighbors above and below him by having the TV or the radio on in the living room. So he would come home at like midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning and lay in this little foam bed in the kitchen watching television. So that's first time I saw it. And there were mirrors everywhere, by the way, too. And since Gene did open the door, I will tell you that some of the stories I told did involve some of the same activities. Riding through Bear Mountain with the top down on that yellow Volkswagen convertible with snow falling, listening to Pink Floyd and imbibing on whatever. And that was John, you know. So, Diane, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Diane Zacherley Hansen, one of 3 nieces, Linda Zacherley Marston, Bonnie Zacherley, and Andrew Zacherley, who is deceased. He was a nephew. 7 great nieces and nephews, and 14 great-great nieces and nephews. Uncle John to all of us, caring, helpful, and fun. He would appear whenever, either expected or as a surprise, and we were always happy to see him. He was always home for Christmas, birthdays sometimes, and drop-ins. There when someone was in need of help and comforting, and he never missed a funeral. My earliest memory may be I was 4 years old. My family, Mother, Dad, and Linda, would get on the train to Chestnut Hill, where he lived with my grandparents. When we arrived, we would all hop into my grandfather's Buick, and Uncle John would take us for the Sunday drive. He loved Sunday drives, and his friend Jeff was wonderful to continue to take him on these when he could no longer drive himself. When we got back home, dinner was always waiting. We would gather around the large Victorian dining room table, and the fun would begin. Uncle John and my father, Bruce, would start back and forth. They were like Laurel and Hardy, Abbott and Costello. But no, it was Zacherley and Zacherley. Everyone enjoyed the banter. Laughing was necessary, and I, 4 years old, loved it the best. Off the chair, onto the floor, laughing so hard it hurt. We would always end the meal with ice cream and pretzels. Later, when he moved to New York City, we would be driving to New England to visit my Aunt Laura, his sister, and his radio show would be on, and we would call in from the car and talk to him. And then the next thing we knew, he would arrive at Aunt Laura's, and we'd all be together and have great fun. He always had something to share, new pictures, items you fans made, or a new car. Who will never forget the little yellow Volkswagen convertible, the Bug? He picked up my Laura at school, took Bruce on a ride in Fairmount Park, and even took Joe around Harlem with the top down, no less. Thank you, Perry, Jean, Jeff, Sharon, Holly, Patsy, Sparkle, David, and all the rest of you. You were his friends, love, and life. We all have our memories. He was Uncle John.
And now Perry will come up with a reading, and we honestly don't have time for everybody probably wants to say something, but you're more than welcome to spend time just amongst ourselves and share stories if you'd like. We just can't do it formal because we're running out of time, okay? So thank you very much, Perry.
John would be absolutely overwhelmed to see you all here. He was the most unassuming and precious person. So, John and I shared a very deep love that started the night we met and lasted until he passed away 45 years later. I can't find the words to communicate how painful his loss is for me, so you'll forgive me if I turn to the poet George Santayana and read the second stanza of a poem, 2WP, to better convey what I'm feeling in my heart. With you, a part of me hath passed away, for in the peopled forest of my mind, a tree made leafless by this wintry wind shall never don again its green array. Chapel and fireside, country road and bay, have something of their friendliness resigned. Another, if I would, I could not find, and I am grown much older in a day, but yet I treasure in my memory your gift of charity, your mellow ease, and the dear honor of your amity. For these once mine, my life is rich with these, and I scarce know which part may greater be, what I keep of you, or you rob of me. Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
I'd like to thank everyone very much for coming. Again, as Jeff suggested, please feel free to talk amongst yourself and stay. We have a little time left. John would like it for you to interact, and please permit the family to have its privacy as they leave now. Thank you very much.
And don't forget, the webcast will be archived for a couple of minutes.
Hush-a-bye, rock-a-bye, the Spider-Man is coming by to spin a web of dreams for you. Casket high, casket low, Daddy rocks you to and fro. The Spider-Man will make your dreams come true. Dream about a magic land where shadows fill the night, where goblins stalk and monsters walk. Oh, what a lovely sight. If you're good, pretty soon the creature from the Black Lagoon will come and guard you while you dream away. Dream about a tiny bird drawn by a fuzzy bird, and by your side some mummy's ride. Think how you like that. Those both eyes, that's fun. Now just close
Nice job.
another one. You're such a beauty I can only say. You're looking more like Mommy every day.
I've been writing this thing quite recently, and having attended the gala opening in the opera at Versailles last weekend, I decided that I would write my opera and get it over with. You know, I figure that the plot of an opera is not much worse than the plot of a movie, so if you can't lick 'em, join 'em, you know. Well, I implemented my decision by writing music and posting the libretto to an exciting new work, a dramatic masterpiece that probably will never be repeated again after this evening, as a matter of fact. It's entitled Il Draculare. Thank you, my dear. Now, of course, the opera opens with Count Dracula pursuing the beautiful Princess Sananka. You understand? That she's visiting her uncle, Dr. Frankenstein. But Princess Sananka is secretly in love with Larry Talbot, younger brother. He goes under the name of Jack Milton. That's the way I worked it out. Jack Milton has been unjustly accused, mind you, by the Internal Revenue Department. And he has become a troubadour. He has also just won the head-smashing contest in Versailles. Princess Ananka running through the Malaphasia Gardens in a diaphanous dress, off-white tulle, you know. Jack Milton in hot pursuit. So is Count Dracula. Now the two men meet, and they fight, and Dracula has his head smashed, and he sings a dark hymn of revenge, Non voglio giocare in vostra cortiglia. We are not going to be here Monday as we usually are, but we'll be here New Year's Eve with a grand climax to the year, and I will choose the Transylvanian Man of the Year. I'm sure you're all waiting to hear who that might be. I'll say one thing, it won't be anybody in this movie tonight. We've got some bad movies here at Channel 7, but that one's one of the worst, I think. Some guy had the nerve to call up and said he liked the movie. All right, Larry. I'm coming. I'm coming. I'm coming.